Let me call on stage for our next panel, Decarbonization and ESG, our great moderator, Mr. George Teriakidis, Area Manager, Eastern Mediterranean and Black Sea from DNV. For decarbonization, Mr. Dimitris Anassis, partner of Hill Dickinson, and Mr. John Chogas, head of bunkering and trading from Sekavin. And for the ESG, Penelope Kassani, Mrs. Penelope Kassani, partner governance, risk and assurance, Moore, Greece, and Mrs. Fotini Mega, partner assurance from Ernst & Young, Greece. Welcome, dear panelists. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll try and make this as short and snappy as we can do it in order to catch up with the time we have lost. There have been many interesting things that have been said already. But at this point, first of all, to introduce again the panel, we have Mr. Dimitris Anassis, who's partner at Hill Dickinson. We have Mr. John Chogas, who is basically head of bunkering and trading at Sekavin. Mrs. Fotini Mega, partner at Ernst & Young. And Mrs. Penelope Kassani, partner for governance, risk and assurance at Moore, Greece. So, at this point, what we have are all the results that were made during the Navigator Assembly that took place earlier this year, where different stakeholders, some of them in this room, gathered and collected certain key points for two topics that we're going to discuss in this panel, which is ESG and decarbonization. It goes without saying that the 20 minutes which we'll have, we'll try and squeeze it down to 15 minutes of fame for all of you. They're not enough. Many of them have already been said, but we will try to highlight certain things. So without delaying the process even more, I'll just turn to John. And I'll just ask him that for decarbonization, we have all seen the topics that were highlighted during this assembly earlier this year. Most of them are things that we were expecting. What are your reflections on these topics from your side? John.
Thank you, George. Thank you, the organizers. Thanks for the Bezardakos family. Glad to be among friends. We've actually discussed a lot about decarbonization. I think that there are various aspects to it. We could go on for hours, but unfortunately we have to keep it short. So my 2 cents as follows. There is no silver bullet. There is not going to be one unified fuel for the future. At the moment, the bunkers of the vessel are the main OPEX. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but shipping is the sitting duck. We are to be blamed for 3% of the emissions, but we are under huge pressure. We are under violent pressure for a regulatory change. And unfortunately, things are shaping up even worse for us. We have at least 5 or 6 options coming up in the future. We have discussed this in the previous Navigator panel, and I'm going to actually blend it down to the options at the moment available. First of all, we have what I would say the more commercial options, the low-hanging fruits, which are mainly slow steaming or biofuels. These are things that will not completely alter the picture as we see it now. Moving on, we have more drastic solutions as the LPG, the ammonia, the nuclear, the hydrogen, the methanols. But I would say that someone has to pay for all this, and I don't see a clear path. There needs to be synergies, there needs to be collaboration. The Greek ship owner, the international ship owner, cannot withstand such a burden alone, just for 3%.
So in other words, low-hanging fruits first, operational measures, become more efficient, and then the problem of cost.
There is a huge problem of cost at the moment. And to be honest, I think that the market will turn towards the 2 solutions I mentioned, the biofuels, which are already up and coming in many ports, B24, B30, in the main bunker hubs in Singapore, in Rotterdam, in Greece very soon, and we're going to see some slow steaming. Slow steaming has always been a solution on the table. We're going to also see a lot of people scrubbing. I'm pretty sure of that.
Okay. John, I have to stop you there. Definitely there are many questions in the heads of many in the crowd, and I invite them after this to reach you out if they want to discuss something. I'll turn to Dimitris. Dimitri, from your side, there are various other challenges, however, which go beyond technical. Can
right.
you share your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. First of all, I should thank the Navigator people for inviting me here to speak. I do come with some provocative thoughts and ideas. Hopefully, it's only going to assist the discussion. Right. Well, there's no doubt that there are significant challenges that are only matched by uncertainty when it comes to decarbonization. So the legal and regulatory framework, the technology and innovation required, and the various types of fuel to be used are some of them. But as it was said actually in the previous panel, shipping is only part of the chain. Shipping is only part of the global trade, and this needs to be kept in mind when considering decarbonization. At the same time, it was also said in the previous panel that scientists have caused those in charge of compliance to be pushing for measures. But at the same time, those in charge of compliance need to take into account the particularities and intricacies of the market and the industry that they're seeking to regulate. And in that regard, only just by taking an example, the Carbon Intensity Index, CII, one can see that the lobbying in terms of, for example, the tanker operators went very well. So that in terms of the correction factors used to calculate CII, one can see that there are specific rules, for example, for STS operations and for short voyages with tanker vessels. At the same time, though, the bulker industry didn't do so well in terms of lobbying the IMO, because in calculating CII, one is not to take into account adverse weather, delays outside the port, and various other things that can be catastrophic in terms of the image of a vessel. Right, so moving on in terms of what can be done, I think that inevitably someone needs to consider that if we see this, as John said, this violent push for compliance as an opportunity to polarize amongst ourselves, and by amongst ourselves I mean the stakeholders, the various stakeholders, owners, charters, their financiers, their regulators, etc. That's a lose-lose situation. Inevitably, people have to collaborate, and I'm glad that, as a litigator, I thrive in conflict. That's what we do. But I was glad to hear in the previous panels that the word collaboration was a key and common theme. And honestly, having seen the polarization that all these efforts towards carbonization have caused, I can tell you that collaboration is a one-way street when it comes to solving the problems. As John said, shipping only accounts for 3% of global emissions, yet it accounts for 90% of global transport. And that is, again, to be taken in mind. At the same time, what I call the domino effect is very important, because in the early years of the sensitivity towards decarbonization and ESG, people thought it was very cute to have on their website that they're part of an initiative to assist with decarbonization and so on. It's not so cute anymore because there's a domino whereby a financier who also needs to have on their website that they're assisting with decarbonization is pushing the owner is pushing, and then it goes on. So if you're left behind, you will vanish. And it's quite the irony, in my experience, advising on decarbonization and other clauses. It's quite the irony that it's the bigger charters, it's the bigger operators that are very much in favor of collaborating with the large owners. So you have the oil majors that actually are pushing for harder compliance on their part because they say, well, there's a minimum we've got to comply with. And that's great. But at the same time, you will get the smaller operator that doesn't want to hear about having to pay because, again, it was stated very correctly in the previous panels that that's great, but who pays for it? And what I think is one of the most important parts of the equation is to try to fit this inevitable tax. It's a tax, you've got to tax the shipping industry. Sure, okay, subject to what we just said about how and to what extent shipping is responsible for global emissions. But given that inevitably you have to tax them, you have to fit those taxes, whether you call them being part of the EU ETS system or otherwise, you have to incorporate these taxes into the business model that is shipping. And that just doesn't mean, although I usually represent owners, that just doesn't mean that the charter has to pay for it. There needs to be a discussion. There needs to be
collaboration.
And so that's a common thing.
I think just to sum up what both of you said is that unfortunately there is no single solution, either if we're talking about the technical or if we're talking about how this will be implemented with all the stakeholders, and collaboration, which I fully agree, and actually collaboration and taking each part their own responsibility on the whole chain. It's one theme that we should be talking more about.
Absolutely. I should stop because I could just go on forever.
Yes, you have to stop because we don't have enough time. But thank you very much. I'll move to the part of ESG. Now, Mrs. Mega, Ms. Hassani, we've seen what are the outcomes on the ESG topic from the Navigator Assembly earlier this year. And I know that you have had some discussions, some thoughts of that. And Mrs. Mega, you were thinking more of a more strategic approach on ESG. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, I want to talk about a little bit whatever we have discussed today. We talk about disruption, transformation, about changes, about fairness in things and solutions, who will pay all of those things. So all these dilemmas or all these new things that as a sector you need to face comes at the end, at least from my perspective as a financial services advisor, to strategy. And one strategy does not fit to all. We have huge players here, we have smaller family-oriented businesses, you have different types affected by various sectors. All of them have a common underlying and a unique thing to face. So you need to develop your strategy. This might be merging, pooling, collaborating, lobbying, or whatever you believe it fits your strategy and ultimately the purpose of your business. So in all the international and global organizations, they all talk about their purpose. What is the purpose? That each and every company you have here and you operate, what is your ultimate purpose? So this is about strategic development on how you will use the non-financial information at the moment. And because I know that we want to also to talk about the reporting aspect of ESG, one thing from my side is that do not afraid regulation. Regulation means money. I come from a financial services. The more money are in regulator industries. NASDAQ, NISE, US is regulated. So regulations brings opportunities and you need to create the environment in order to survive and to take the most of these opportunities. And I think if the Greek shipping is good in one thing, is taking strategic decision. This comes back to, I would like to say, το ταξίδι στη Ζάκυνθο, αλλά είναι το ταξίδι στην Ιθάκη. Strategic decisions, whatever obstacles you have faced, you have taken strategic decisions correctly by having in your mind the right thing to do. So this is a message from my side.
I think one thing we did not mention as well is that, very correctly, I think we all agree that, okay, ESG is out there, it's not just a report, but you need to put your mind down and make your strategy, your steps. But we're not talking about decarbonization only, because in the mind of many people, ESG is equal to decarbonization, and we understand that this is not the case.
Not at all, because it's whatever is the purpose and what drives each ship owner or participant in this industry. For another, might be, I don't know, developing in the future that will be able to manage autonomous vessels or whatever will be the evolution of this industry. So it really depends on what is the purpose, on the E, or on the S, or on the G.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kasani, reporting.
Yes. Hello, and thank you very much to Navigator. It's lovely to be here. ESG is definitely not about decarbonization only, but also a lot of other factors we have to consider, such as society and governance. But because I have very little time, I'm only going to say that it's definitely a change. It is definitely a change in the reporting scene of the private, especially the private shipping sector. And there is an analogy here, I think, from back to the time where all of us accountants had to consider how we would migrate from an era where there were no specific accounting standards and financial reporting standards, and we had to migrate to an era where the financial reporting landscape was becoming a lot more specific with the introduction of the IFRSs and US GAAP. It's pretty much the same now, only the reporting information, the information that has to go into our sustainability report is of a different nature. And that is really what we're trying to do. It's not about the standards so much. It's not about the strategic decisions so much. Yes, they are important, absolutely important. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a report. And there needs to be a report that faithfully represents our efforts and our sustainability position and our sustainability performance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we close, and since reporting and ESG has a common thing with decarbonization, and I think you like to add a comment about transparency.
Yes, I think that, first of all, we all agree that shipping has a disproportionate role in terms of decarbonization to how much it pollutes. But even so, in order for shipping to assist with decarbonization, it needs to be efficient. And in order for shipping to be efficient, we need to know and we need to be able to measure emissions, amongst other things. So in order for us to be able to do that, we need transparency. And shipping has never been a transparent industry, and that's fine. There are reasons for that. But if we focus on transparency, which I believe is one of the requirements amongst, for example, financiers. I was in a forum not long ago, and one of the biggest banks in the world was represented, and we were talking about transparency, and they say, well, we take it as a given. Okay, great. Now let's actually put it to use, and let's apply it. So I think if one were to summarize it all just by using a few words, yes, I think one would need to go this way. So, a violent push to compliance or for compliance, collaboration, efficiency, transparency, and then hopefully results.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 40 seconds. Comment in 30 seconds.
On the transparency part, transparency and smart use of transparency, if this is politically correct to say, it comes with benefits. So we talked about the ETS. The ETS opens a door to the European funding of green projects that you have, which is very important, and we only talk about the ETS and the financial impact and who will pay and why me, why them, why somebody will have to pay for fuel, for emissions. This is the new phase, but it also opened the door to funding in European Commissions. Airlines have been giving those funds in the COVID era when they will be heavily impacted and destroyed, supported by European governments, which is very important to my view. I don't know how will this evolve, and it's something that is not very clear, but it opens a door. When you pay a tax, you want something back.
I think you've been a great panel, and definitely you have promised that we can create a conference out of the things that we've just said. We'll wrap it up here to save some time. Thank you very much for all. Thank you for your attention.